Isaac Phillips was tired. Not just from the 8-hour shift he'd pulled at Starbucks, serving lattes and frappes to the steady stream of customers, but tired in a deeper sense. At 23, he had imagined his life would be more stable by now, but instead, he was living paycheck to paycheck in Austin, Texas, juggling 2 jobs just to make rent. The weight of it all pressed down on him as he trudged through the cool night air, heading towards the downtown ATM he always used. His sneakers slapped against the pavement, the sounds of the city buzzing around him. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. Bank balance, $12.43. He let out a sigh. That was barely enough for a decent meal, let alone the groceries he needed to last the week. Payday was still days away, and his stomach grumbled in protest. Maybe he'd just grab some instant ramen. Again, he stood in front of the ATM, his fingers hesitating over the keypad. He knew it was pointless, but still, he tried to withdraw $10. As expected, the screen blinked with a message, insufficient funds. Isaac groaned and hit the machine in frustration. Typical, he muttered under his breath. He was about to walk away when something strange happened. The screen refreshed, but instead of the cold rejection message, it now read, "Transaction approved." "What?" Isaac whispered, leaning in closer as if the machine might explain itself. And then it happened. The whirring of the ATM, the unmistakable sound of cash being dispensed. He blinked as the machine spit out not 1 or 2 bills, but a thick stack. Isaac's heart raced as he snatched the money, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. In disbelief, he fumbled with his phone, opening his banking app to check his balance. His eyes widened. Instead of the pitiful $12.43, his account now showed a balance of over $10,000. Isaac's mouth went dry. "What the?" he muttered, glancing around nervously, half expecting someone to accuse him of theft. But the street was empty, and the ATM remained silent, as if nothing unusual had happened. He stood there for a moment, gripping the cash in his hands, his mind spinning. Should he call the bank? Report the glitch? Every rational bone in his body screamed at him to do the right thing, to return the money. But then again, he had been struggling for so long. What if this was his chance to catch a break? Just a little taste of something better? Isaac shoved the cash into his pocket and walked home, his heart pounding. He told himself it was a one-time thing, just this once. He'd take the money and use it wisely, pay off some bills, maybe save a little. Nobody would even notice. Right? By the time he reached his small one-bedroom apartment, the initial shock had worn off, replaced by a giddy excitement. He spread the cash out on his bed, feeling the weight of the bills in his hands. The voice of guilt whispered at the back of his mind, but he silenced it quickly. "I deserve this," he muttered. "Just this once." As Isaac drifted off to sleep that night, he tried to convince himself that everything would be fine. But even then, deep in the pit of his stomach, he knew that nothing this easy ever came without consequences. Isaac woke up the next morning with a strange feeling in his chest, a combination of excitement and unease. He pulled out his phone and checked his account again, half expecting the balance to have corrected itself. But no, the $10,000 was still there, staring back at him. The anxiety he felt the night before had faded, replaced by a dangerous curiosity. Could the glitch happen again? Could he use it? The temptation was undeniable. Isaac reasoned with himself. He was drowning in debt, and nobody seemed to care. What harm could there be in taking a little more if it meant he could finally get ahead? That evening, after his shift at Starbucks, Isaac found himself back at the ATM. His palms were sweaty as he entered a larger amount, fingers trembling over the buttons. Approved. More money came out. This time, he didn't feel guilty. He stuffed the bills in his backpack and hurried home, the rush of adrenaline mixing with the faintest twinge of unease in his stomach. Days turned into weeks, and soon Isaac was making regular trips to the ATM, withdrawing larger sums each time. The money flowed like water, and Isaac's life started to change. He upgraded his wardrobe with designer clothes he'd only ever admired from afar. He swapped out his old cracked phone for the latest model. Nights out with friends, once rare and frugal, became regular occurrences where he picked up the tab without hesitation. His friends, Alex and Jordan, noticed the sudden change in Isaac's lifestyle. They had always known him as the guy who counted every penny, but now Now he was the one suggesting expensive restaurants, buying rounds of drinks, and even hinting at a trip to Las Vegas. "Dude, where's all this money coming from?" Jordan asked one night, eyebrows raised in suspicion as Isaac waved off yet another bill at the bar. Isaac laughed it off, taking a casual sip of his drink. "Just got lucky with some investments, you know? Right place, right time." Alex didn't seem to buy it. "Investments? Since when are you an investment guy?" Isaac shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Since now, I guess." But as the night wore on and the drinks kept coming, Isaac found it harder and harder to maintain the facade. Deep down, he knew his friends were right to be suspicious. He knew this couldn't last forever. Yet the high of having money, of not worrying for once, was too strong to resist. He told himself he'd stop soon, that he'd pull back before things got out of hand. But in the back of his mind, Isaac also knew the truth. He was already in too deep. Isaac woke up the next morning with a strange feeling in his chest, a combination of excitement and unease. He pulled out his phone and checked his accounting, half expecting the balance to have corrected itself. But no, the $10,000 was still there, staring back at him. The anxiety he felt the night before had faded, replaced by a dangerous curiosity. Could the glitch happen again? Could he use it? The temptation was undeniable. Isaac reasoned with himself. He was drowning in debt, and nobody seemed to care. What harm could there be in taking a little more if it meant he could finally get ahead? That evening, after his shift at Starbucks, Isaac found himself back at the ATM. His palms were sweaty as he entered a larger amount, fingers trembling over the buttons. Approved. More money came out. This time, he didn't feel guilty. He stuffed the bills into his backpack and hurried home, the rush of adrenaline mixing with the faintest twinge of unease in his stomach. Days turned into weeks, and soon Isaac was making regular trips to the ATM, withdrawing larger sums each time. The money flowed like water, and Isaac's life started to change. He upgraded his wardrobe with designer clothes he'd only ever admired from afar. He swapped out his old cracked phone for the latest model. Nights out with friends, once rare and frugal, became regular occurrences where he picked up the tab without hesitation. His friends, Alex and Jordan, noticed the sudden change in Isaac's lifestyle. They had always known him as the guy who counted every penny, but now he was the one suggesting expensive restaurants, buying rounds of drinks, and even hinting at a trip to Las Vegas. "Dude, where's all this money coming from?" Jordan asked one night, eyebrows raised in suspicion as Isaac waved off yet another bill at the bar. Isaac laughed it off, taking a casual sip of his drink. "Just got lucky with some investments, you know? Right place, right time." Alex didn't seem to buy it. "Investments? Since when are you an investment guy?" Isaac shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Since now, I guess." But as the night wore on and the drinks kept coming, Isaac found it harder and harder to maintain the facade. Deep down, he knew his friends were right to be suspicious. He knew this couldn't last forever. Yet the high of having money, of not worrying for once, was too strong to resist. He told himself he'd stop soon, that he'd pull back before things got out of hand. But in the back of his mind, Isaac also knew the truth. He was already in too deep. As the weeks passed, Isaac's newfound life of excess began to unravel, just not in the way he expected. The money kept flowing from the ATM glitch, sure, but with every withdrawal, the excitement started to fade, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. It started out small. At first, Isaac would check his bank account every day, sometimes twice, to make sure everything was still intact. The $10,000 was still there. No suspicious withdrawals, no red flags. But then, his behavior became obsessive. He checked the balance 5, 6, even 10 times a day, waiting for the inevitable correction. Every ATM visit felt like playing Russian roulette. One wrong move, one glitch fix, and it could all come crashing down. The paranoia began to seep into his daily life. At work, he'd catch himself glancing over his shoulder, half expecting someone from the bank or even the police to come storming in and arrest him right behind the espresso machine. Every phone call from an unknown number made his heart skip a beat, and any mail with a bank logo on the envelope was enough to send him spiraling. "Dude, you've been acting weird lately," Alex commented one night as they hung out in Isaac's apartment. Isaac had distanced himself from his friends for the most part, but sometimes he couldn't avoid them. They were too curious, He was too careless. Isaac looked up from his phone, where he had just been checking his balance again, his pulse quickening for no reason. Huh? Nah, man, I'm good, just stressed from work, he lied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Work, huh? You don't seem too stressed when you're throwing money around like you're some kind of baller, Jordan chimed in, raising an eyebrow. Isaac laughed it off again, but this time it felt hollow. Like I said, investments. Been lucky. But even as the words left his mouth, Isaac knew he wasn't convincing anyone, least of all himself. His friends could sense something was off. He wasn't just paranoid, he was unraveling, little by little. Soon, it wasn't just his friends noticing. His manager at Starbucks, Chloe, pulled him aside during one of their shifts. You've been zoning out a lot lately, Isaac. Is everything okay? She asked, her expression genuinely concerned. Isaac's throat tightened. Was she onto him? No, that was impossible. Chloe didn't know anything about the money. Still, her words made his stomach churn. Yeah, I'm fine, he replied quickly, too quickly. Just tired, I guess. Tired enough to mess up 3 drink orders in a row? Chloe frowned. Look, if something's going on, you can talk to me. I've seen this before, you know? People getting into bad situations. Isaac swallowed hard, avoiding her gaze. He forced a smile, one that even he knew looked shaky. Nah, it's nothing like that. Just been busy with other stuff. I'll be better next shift. She studied him for a long moment before finally nodding, though Isaac could tell she wasn't convinced. He promised himself he'd keep it together, at least at work. He couldn't afford to lose his job. Not now, when the anxiety was eating away at him from the inside. He needed the normalcy, even if everything else in his life felt like it was spinning out of control. Nights became the worst. Isaac would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching him. The glitch had to be fixed by now, right? There was no way he could keep getting away with it. Yet, each time he visited the ATM, the machine obediently spat out the cash, as if mocking his paranoia. One night, after another sleepless bout of tossing and turning, Isaac decided to stop. No more trips to the ATM. He'd taken enough. If he pushed it any further, something terrible would happen. He could feel it. He'd keep the money he had left, lay low, and pretend none of it ever happened. But the universe had a cruel sense of timing. 2 days later, Isaac got an email from the bank. His heart sank as he saw the subject line, "Suspicious activity detected on your account." His breath caught in his throat as he opened the message, eyes scanning the words with growing horror. They had noticed the abnormal withdrawals. An investigation had been opened. Isaac could practically hear the blood rushing in his ears as he reread the message over and over, hoping that somehow it would change. But the words remained the same. The bank was on to him. His hands shook as he put his phone down, his mind spinning out of control. This was it. He was caught. All the paranoia, all the sleepless nights, it was all crashing down around him. What was he supposed to do now? Panic gripped his chest, squeezing tighter and tighter. Maybe he could return the money? No, it was too late for that. What if he tried to claim it was all a mistake? But who would believe him? There was no way out, no way to undo what he had done. Isaac couldn't sit still. He started pacing the tiny apartment, running his hands through his hair, muttering to himself. He couldn't go to jail. He just couldn't. In a moment of desperation, he opened his laptop and typed out a frantic confession, intending to email it to the bank. But halfway through, he froze. No, this wasn't the way. They wouldn't care about his confession. They'd still come after him. After what felt like hours, Isaac slammed his laptop shut and buried his face in his hands. There was only one option left. He had to come clean. Not just to the bank, but to the world. Maybe, just maybe, if he controlled the narrative, he could salvage some part of his life. Isaac reached for his phone again, this time opening up the contact list for local news outlets. It was time to tell his story. Isaac had never been the kind of person to make headlines. He was the quiet guy, the one who kept to himself, worked hard, and avoided any unnecessary attention. But now, he found himself in a situation so out of control that the only solution he could think of was to go public. Maybe if he told his side of the story first, before the bank or the police got to him, he could somehow soften the blow. With shaking hands, Isaac sent an email to the Austin Herald, one of the city's local news outlets. The subject line was simple, but loaded. Confession. He briefly described his situation, leaving out the most damning details for now, just enough to get their attention. Less than 24 hours later, his phone rang. It was a reporter from the paper, Lucy Graham, a seasoned journalist with a reputation for digging deep into human interest stories. Isaac Phillips? Her voice was professional but curious. I got your email. I'd like to hear more. This glitch you mentioned sounds serious. Isaac swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. Yeah, it's not exactly something I'm proud of, but I need to come clean. Maybe telling my story will stop someone else from doing something stupid. Lucy paused for a moment. We can do an interview if you're comfortable with that. We can meet in person or do it over the phone. No pressure. Just tell me when and how you want to talk. Isaac felt a strange sense of relief. Someone was finally willing to listen. But along with the relief came fear, a creeping cold feeling in his chest. This was it. There was no going back. Once the story was out there, the authorities would know, and there would be consequences. Real, life-altering consequences. After a few moments of silence, Isaac finally spoke. Let's meet in person, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Tomorrow. There's a coffee shop on 5th Street. I'll be there at 2. The next day, Isaac walked into the coffee shop like a man on death row. His nerves were a mess, but he forced himself to stay calm. He spotted Lucy immediately, a sharp-dressed woman in her early 30s, typing away on her laptop in the corner. She glanced up as he approached, offering a polite smile. Isaac? She asked, standing and offering a handshake. He nodded, his throat dry. Yeah, that's me. They sat down, and after a bit of small talk to ease the tension, Lucy dove into the heart of the matter. So, Isaac, tell me what happened. Isaac took a deep breath. It started a few months ago, he began, staring down at the table. I was broke, like really broke. I was working 2 jobs, trying to keep up with rent and bills, and it felt like I was drowning. You know? He glanced up at her, and Lucy nodded, encouraging him to continue. One night, I went to an ATM to take out some money, but there was this glitch. Instead of rejecting my transaction, it approved it and gave me way more money than I asked for. At first, I didn't know what to do. I thought it was a mistake that would be corrected by the next day. But when I checked my account, the money was still there. I didn't return it. I used it. Isaac could feel Lucy's eyes on him, but he kept talking, his words spilling out faster now, as if he needed to get everything off his chest at once. After that, I started going back. The glitch didn't stop. I withdrew more money. Every time I thought, this is the last time, but it wasn't. It became this addiction, I guess, and it felt like I was untouchable. Like, how could something this easy be wrong? His hands fidgeted nervously as he continued. I bought things I didn't need, took trips, treated my friends like I was someone important, but the guilt, it started eating at me. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. And then I got an email from the bank. His voice dropped, a note of panic creeping in. They're investigating my account. I don't know how much longer I have before they figure everything out. Lucy sat back in her chair, her expression neutral but intrigued. Isaac, you understand that by coming forward with this, you could face legal consequences, right? Fraud charges, jail time even. Isaac's heart sank. He knew that was coming, but hearing it out loud made it all too real. Yeah, he whispered. I know. Lucy leaned forward, her voice softening. Why are you telling me this now? Why not just keep quiet and hope it blows over? Isaac ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. Because I'm scared, he admitted. I'm scared that if I don't say something now, it'll only get worse. I've screwed up. I know that, but maybe if I come clean, I can at least try to make things right. Lucy nodded, typing out a few notes before looking up at him again. Isaac, I appreciate your honesty. I'll write your story, but I want you to be prepared. Once it's out there, you won't be able to take it back. People are going to see you as the guy who stole money from a glitch in the system. Isaac nodded, his stomach twisting with anxiety. He had expected that. He didn't want to be seen as a thief, but at this point, he wasn't sure how else people would see him. I just want to own up to it, Isaac said quietly. I don't care what people think of me. I just want to get ahead of this before it ruins my life even more. The interview wrapped up shortly after that, and as Isaac walked out of the coffee shop, he felt a strange mix of emotions. He was relieved to have finally told someone the truth, but that relief was overshadowed by the fear of what was coming next. The article was published within days, and Isaac's story was out in the world. Local man exploits ATM glitch, faces investigation. The headline was simple, but the impact was huge. Suddenly, Isaac was the talk of the town. His phone blew up with texts from friends, co-workers, and even people he hadn't spoken to in years. Some were shocked, some were supportive, but most were confused. "Why would you admit to something like that?" they asked. Isaac didn't have a good answer. He wasn't even sure if coming forward had been the right thing to do. But there was no turning back now. His confession had set the wheels in motion. Within a week, Isaac received another call, this time from the police. The call came on a Wednesday morning, waking Isaac from a restless sleep. The buzzing of his phone cut through the quiet of his apartment, and when he saw the caller ID, Austin Police Department, his stomach dropped. This was it. His heart raced as he stared at the phone, too terrified to answer. He knew why they were calling. With trembling hands, Isaac picked up. "Hello? Mr. Phillips, this is Officer Ramirez from the Austin Police Department. We've been alerted to some suspicious financial activity linked to your account. We'd like you to come down to the station to answer a few questions." Isaac's throat tightened. "Yeah. Sure, I can come in." The rest of the conversation was a blur. They didn't say much more over the phone, but it didn't matter. Isaac knew what was happening. His confession to the media had been the trigger, and now the authorities were closing in. As he hung up, he felt a strange calm wash over him. The worst part, the waiting, was over. Now it was time to face the consequences of what he'd done. He spent the next hour pacing around his apartment, mentally preparing for what was to come. His mind drifted to his friends, his family. What would they think of him after this? Would they be angry? Disappointed? Would anyone understand why he'd done it? By the time he arrived at the police station, Isaac felt numb. He sat in the small, sterile interview room, facing Officer Ramirez and a second officer, Detective Harper, who wasted no time getting to the point. "We've reviewed the withdrawals from your account," Detective Harper began, flipping through a thick file in front of her. "It seems you've taken advantage of a glitch in the ATM system, withdrawing funds that were not rightfully yours over the past several months. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Isaac's palms were sweaty, but he forced himself to meet their eyes. "Yes," he said quietly. "It was a mistake. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. I've been struggling for a long time, and when this happened, I thought it was my way out. I just lost control." The officers exchanged glances before Ramirez spoke again. "Mr. Phillips, we understand financial struggles, but this is a serious offense. You're looking at multiple counts of fraud. The total amount you withdrew is substantial, and the bank has filed charges." Isaac's heart sank, but he nodded. "I know. I'm not trying to run from this. I came forward because I want to make it right. I'll pay back everything, do whatever it takes." For the next 2 hours, Isaac answered every question they threw at him. He didn't hold anything back. There was no point in lying, no point in trying to minimize what he had done. The truth was out there, and all he could do now was accept whatever punishment was coming. By the time he left the station, Isaac felt drained, but there was also a small flicker of relief. The weight of his secret was finally off his shoulders, and whatever happened next, at least he wouldn't be living with the constant fear of getting caught. A few weeks later, Isaac found himself standing in court, listening as the charges were read aloud. The words sounded distant, like they were happening to someone else. Fraud, unauthorized withdrawals, total amount taken, $45,000. His knees felt weak as the judge spoke, but he kept his head high, refusing to look away. The bank wanted restitution, of course. They wanted their money back, and they wanted Isaac to pay for what he had done. But after hearing his story, after understanding the desperation that had driven him to this, the court showed some leniency. In the end, Isaac was sentenced to 500 hours of community service and ordered to pay back the full amount in restitution. He avoided jail time, but the road ahead was far from easy. Paying back $45,000 on a barista's salary would take years. And yet, despite the daunting task ahead, Isaac felt grateful. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. 6 months later, Life after the trial was humbling. Isaac returned to his job at Starbucks, and though things were awkward at first, his coworkers slowly began to treat him like normal again. The customers, for the most part, didn't recognize him from the news story. But there were always a few who gave him strange looks, whispering to each other as they glanced in his direction. But Isaac didn't care about the gossip. He had more important things on his mind. His community service hours had taken him to local schools, where he spoke to teenagers about financial responsibility and the dangers of shortcuts. At first, the idea of standing in front of a group of kids and admitting his mistakes terrified him. But the more he spoke, the more he realized how important his story was. One afternoon, after finishing a talk at a local high school, a young girl approached him. She couldn't have been more than 17, but the look in her eyes was far older. "Thanks for sharing your story," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "My family's struggling, and I've thought about doing some dumb stuff to help out. Hearing you, I don't know, it made me think twice." Isaac felt a lump rise in his throat. This was why he had come forward. If he could help even one person avoid the mistakes he had made, then maybe all of this, the embarrassment, the guilt, the punishment, had been worth it. As the months passed, Isaac began to rebuild his life, little by little. He moved into a cheaper apartment, cut back on his spending, and focused on paying off his debts. It was slow progress, but it was honest. And for the first time in a long time, Isaac felt at peace. He'd learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of chasing easy money. But more importantly, he had learned something about himself. He wasn't the guy who took shortcuts anymore. He was the guy who faced his mistakes head-on, no matter how hard or painful it was. And in the end, that was the kind of wealth that no amount of money could buy.